Good morning, board members.
Good morning.
Let's call this meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the St. Croix County Board of Supervisors. This meeting has been properly noticed. We have with us this morning Pastor Larry Zyman to call us into humility before the throne. Larry is one of the pastors at Faith Community Church, and in addition, Larry is part of the Chaplains Corps with the St. Croix County Sheriff's Office, and we appreciate your involvement in that. Now, Larry, I'd invite you forward. All stand.
Will you please join me in prayer? Father in heaven, we thank you for this glorious county known as St. Croix County. We thank you for the privilege of inhabiting this land and sharing in its resources. I thank you for the men and women here gathered today who are given significant leadership in what this place looks like. Thank you for each employee in this building and the many buildings throughout our county who provided infrastructure of sanity in the midst of all the challenges of day-to-day life. I ask God that you would grant this day the gift of wisdom to these leaders, to steward well the responsibilities that you have laid before them, the resources that seem awfully scarce at times, but are before them both material and human, that you'd help them in their decisions which impact tens of thousands of people, sometimes marginally, sometimes significantly. Would you help them to care about the welfare and the future of these people, more than the acceptance of the people seated on either side of them? Make them leaders for the people. Give them a listening ear. Protect them from hard-heartedness. And even as they do business, may it not be mere business. We ask your help to our administrator, our sheriff, the chair, each department head in every area. Would you give them humility? Would you give them insight? Would you give them power to serve, to build those entrusted to their leadership? And we pray for the citizenry of this county as well. Would you protect us from apathy and give us a heart for one another that our collective health may increase? These are many things, God, we need for your help. And so I ask it all in the name of the only one who lived and died, rose and ascended on high. Amen.
Amen. Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Larry. The clerk has the roll displayed. Board members, please indicate your presence for the roll. The quorum has been established. Supervisors Hood and Peterson are absent and excused. Supervisor Kilber is obviously absent. I do not have any information concerning his attendance. I think it would be appropriate, board members, to recognize that we are privileged this morning to have back in our midst after some absence Supervisor Brian Hirchin. Welcome back, Brian. Wonderful to see you, sir. The consent agenda is in front of you, board members. The consent agenda contains the following items: the minutes from our last meeting, which was held on 4 June, announcement of the date of our next meeting, which will be on 3 September, and there are certain rezonings, technical amendments to some land use and development under Chapter 17. This relates to the town of Somerset. Chair would entertain a motion. Motion from Supervisor Osnes, second from Supervisor Schachner. Proceed to vote on the consent agenda.
Just a second, please. Agnes?
Mine was judged too.
Unanimous.
And the consent agenda is adopted. We set aside time on our agenda at this point for public comment. If there is any person in the audience who wishes to address the board on any matter that is not on the agenda today, any matter not on the agenda, if there's some burning issue that you want to bring to our attention, now would be an appropriate time. Is there anyone that wishes to address the board on any subject not on the agenda? And seeing none, we will proceed. I'm not aware of any presentations or recognitions,
None today.
nor appointments
No.
that I'm aware of. I would direct your attention, board members, to the annual reports as indicated and in your data packet. We do have the annual report from the Highway Department and the sort of ancillary report from the County Supervisor. Are there any questions or comments with respect to those annual reports? Again, as always, I direct them to your attention. If you've not already reviewed them, please do so. And if you have any comments or questions subsequent to this meeting, contact Tim Ramberg, and he will be pleased to respond. Tim, is that correct? You'll be pleased to respond?
Yes.
And at this point, I will ask our County Administrator, Pat Thompson, to take the podium for his Administrator's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back, Brian. Good to see you. And I'd like to personally thank Larry, not only for the prayer this morning, but also about 6 weeks ago, I'm not sure when, but over a month ago, we had a little picnic in the back, and Larry wanted to get involved and show the appreciation from his church for the work of St. Croix County staff in general, and just as a thank you, his organization sponsored, and a group of them put on a very nice lunch in the back, and we appreciate that. We also had the employee picnic this past week, and Larry and some of his people were also working in the food line the whole picnic. And so, you know, Larry is a great member of the community, and we appreciate all the support and prayers from you and your staff. It's well received and well needed, so we want to thank you for that. This morning's financial report was emailed out to you yesterday. This will be in your packet from this point forward. You should be receiving a monthly financial report in your packet. This is a summary of expenditures and revenues through the end of June by department. It's a 2-page report summarizing what the total 2013 budget is for those departments, year-to-date actual expenditures and revenues. If you look at the total for expenditures, we're at about 42% of budget, which is well within line where we should be at this point in the year. Revenues, we're at 26%, which is below where we should be at this point in the year, but the major cause of that is that a lot of the revenues that flow through the county's financial reports are from the state, and those revenues will be showing up later. A lot of the contracts that we have, the revenues will start showing up in July in the second half of the year, and so that's why we're at only 26% of budget for revenues. But that's not a cause for alarm. That just shows that, you know, we're still in the process of collecting state revenues, and those will start to hit the books later this year, second half of this year. So if there's any specific questions, I'll try to answer them, or the finance director. Yes, Supervisor Malik?
I don't recall state revenues lagging so significantly in the month of June. How does this compare with previous years?
Tabitha? Go ahead.
The state made some significant changes, especially in health and human services, and they released the second half of our contracts July 1st. So in the last year or two, when they've really changed their practice of releasing the state dollars, you get a prepayment in January and then the rest of it in July, thinking you're going to live off your tax levy that you've levied for those middle months.
Yes, Supervisor Ostis?
Tabitha, under Fund 725 on revenue, with the fleet fund, $8,500, how do we get that? Is the fleet fund the enterprise?
So the fleet fund was developed as part of the program. What the revenue is the fleet fund charges back the departments for use of the vehicles. So that revenue is just an interdepartmental chargeback until we can do further analysis on the structure of the fleet fund going forward. So it's all the mileage, all the budgeted dollars are in each department's budget. So we charge out to the expense show there, and then it's a revenue back into the fleet fund.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor York?
What does this do to cash flow? I mean, if we've only brought in 19 million of a $73 million budget, where does the funding come from to pay the bills and spend the money and all that kind of thing? I mean, are we borrowing money from the bank? Do we have reserves? I'm just curious, where do you come up with that shortfall to run a continuing operation?
It kind of goes back to the tax levy. You're living off the dollars that you've levied for the 13 budget is what you live off on these middle months until all the state payments start washing through. So you structure your budget based on self-sufficiency that you'll rely until you have your full dollars by year end.
Supervisor Oxford?
Pat, I'd like to suggest a change to the format. I think like we did with the HHS budget, it would be nice to have a column that shows year-to-date budget numbers and then a variance between budget and actual year-to-date.
Say that again.
So right now we've got, the first column is the annual budget total.
Correct.
In addition to that, I'd like to see a budget year-to-date column. So now, does that make sense? So we can compare budget year-to-date versus actual year-to-date.
Okay.
So we don't have to do that math in our head, right?
Okay, sure.
See where we're at?
Yeah, if that helps.
Yeah. And then a variance column that shows what our budget is versus what our actuals are.
And it's helpful too, then we show the 2012 unaudited and 2011, so you can kind of look, you know, prior 2 years actual. So, all right, if there are no further questions, we'll move on to the capital project update. I'm going to fly through this fairly quickly because it's repetitive, so stop me as we move through it. There was other 3 capital projects: the expansion of the 911, vacating Health and Human Services, and the deconstruction of the Health and Human Services There's a summary of the 911 project. We are at RFP 3. RFP 3 is for the construction. Expansion will begin in September and complete by January of 14. There's the schedule for the RFP 3 for the construction. There will be a pre-submittal conference today, 1 o'clock. Proposals are due on the 14th. The selection committee will make a recommendation to the county administrator, and hopefully the contract will be executed by the end of the month. The board has approved the expenditure of up to $20,000 to partner with Pierce County to study the feasibility of merging the two 911 operation centers. The Pierce County Board last week approved the expenditure of up to $20,000 to join with us in a feasibility study. The two administrators have looked at two proposals that were submitted to complete the study. The firm of PSC Alliance, PSC stands for Public Safety Communication. Joanne Miller and myself agreed was the proposal that would best be able to complete the study. And we will finalize the proposal and execute an agreement by August 16th to begin the work of the feasibility study. A lot of you recognize Mr. Anderson. Ole Anderson was board chair from 68 to 89. The reason why his picture here is because years ago the community room downstairs was dedicated to Ole Anderson. The community room will be taken out of service at the end of this month, and so in honor of Mr. Anderson and his family, we've recommended to the board that we would rededicate our county boardroom and relocate the picture of him and the plaque that is on the outside of the community room. We would rededicate the county boardroom in honor of Ole Anderson. And we've contacted the family, and they'll be here next month to do that. Vacating of the Health and Human Services building is the second part of the capital project. We looked at various options, and the committee of the whole, when we met last month, reviewed this report. We've looked at options, staying in place in the Health and Human Services building. We had proposals that looked at leasing space, and one of the options in one of the proposals was to purchase the Old County Market store in New Richmond and renovate that facility for county use. And that is the option that is being recommended to the board today in the form of a resolution. Why buy? Staying in place is not recommended due to the deterioration of the facility. The board passed a resolution in 2010 to vacate. The cost to buy and complete the build-out is estimated at $3 million approximately versus $4.2 million to execute a 5-year lease. Eventually, if need be, the board would be in a position of selling the county market, the Old County Market facility if needed, if there was ever a decision to relocate staff elsewhere. So the summary of the county administrator's recommendation is to buy the county market. You'll have a resolution coming up later this morning. That has been, it says tentatively accepted. It has been accepted. All the contingencies that were listed
from the seller have been, that the seller and buyer, us, have been met. So there are no contingencies left on the table. They've been cleared up. The recommendation is to move all the Health and Human Service departments into the county market, including the ADRC, and try to complete that by mid-2014. The remaining staff in Baldwin, which will be approximately 20 employees after the federal agencies move out of the Baldwin facility, will be approximately 20 staff remaining in Baldwin. So the recommendation is to sell Baldwin, sell the ag building. That would come back to the board in terms of a resolution, so that no action is being taken on that recommendation today. That will come back to you in the form of a resolution probably later this summer, sometime this fall maybe. So more research, more study will go into that. The administration committee will discuss it and bring forward a recommendation if they agree. And then 5 to 10 years looking at the government center property for potential expansion of the government center in Hudson to accommodate future expansion of the courts and court-related offices. The purchase timeline, earnest money has been deposited of $128,000, which is 10% of the purchase price. The contingency have been met. All contingencies have been met, as I said. If approved today, we would close approximately September 13th. Associated costs, the county will be responsible for any prorated taxes, title insurance, and cost of any appraisal or surveys that will need to be done, if done. Seller pays prorated taxes, special assessments if there are any, closing fees, broker fee of 6%, and any associated legal expenses. 2014 bonding, which will occur in the first half of 2014 to accommodate the 911 infrastructure build out. The auction proceeds will be used to execute the purchase of the Old County Market. The bonding will include the costs for the 911 infrastructure, any other capital costs which exceed the auction proceeds. As I said, the sale of Baldwin facility is appraised out at $1.9 million. That doesn't mean that that's what it would sell for, but any proceeds of that sale would be used at the direction of the board, but by board policy, unless otherwise directed, those proceeds would go into the capital improvement fund. And that's just a preliminary discussion on the Baldwin site. As I said, it's been appraised. We did have an offer on the part of the parcel, 1.38 acres. That offer is, we need to revisit that and meet with the party that made the offer based on the appraisal. We may have to work with them on that. Their offer was quite low, but we also have to keep in mind that the Baldwin facility is our backup 911 and EOC. So that's part of any equation, any part of the discussion regarding the facility. We need to make sure we accommodate that in any decision that's made. Expenditures to date, the 911 expansion, phase 1, the earnest money for the purchase of the Old County Market, and some preliminary work on cleanup of the New Richmond site. As you recall, once that facility is vacated, we will begin a process of deconstruction of the former Health and Human Services portion of that building. We have been doing some preliminary site work cleanup And that's the resolution that was approved by the board, which has directed all this work. Any questions? No? All right. We'll be discussing this in a little more detail, at least the part of the recommendation is to purchase, so that's coming up very shortly. So thank you.
Board members, that does take us into our agenda items as far as business issues on our agenda this morning. And the first item is the resolution approving the offer to purchase the former County Market Building in New Richmond, Wisconsin. This resolution comes to us from the Administration Committee. Chair would entertain a motion. Motion from Supervisor Horn, second by Supervisor Schachner. Discussion. This item is at number 33 in your data packet. If yours matches mine, I'm never sure when I give these numbers if that's right, because I'm not on the IQM2. I've downloaded this to my own laptop, and so I've got it here. Do the numbers match? Yep. Okay. Discussion. Supervisor York.
Two questions. The purchase price of the building seems very reasonable for the square feet involved, you know, less than $40 a square feet, where you couldn't build that today for that. But my question is on the other expenses. You say $3 million to get the place up and running, so that's 1.8 to remodel it, where the purchase price is 1.2. Number two, concern or just an issue I'd like to register is if this is just a short-term Band-Aid until we move to Hudson, that's a lot of money to spend. And so has a time frame been set that we would say stay there 10 years and then do this thing, or anything to that effect? Are the remodeling costs set in stone? Is it something you can do on a temporary base, lease stuff, return it when you're done? Other issues like that, because that figure does seem quite large, 1.8 to remodel.
Supervisor York, if I was tracking with you, I think there were 6 questions in there.
Well, I only have 5 fingers. So.
And I will ask our administrator to respond.
Okay, all good questions. The renovation costs are estimates. That'll all be bid out, and those are very rough estimates of what the cost would be for renovation. I mean, we have had some, engineering work done on it to look at the facility to give us a ballpark estimate of what those costs would be. But so that's one thing. I don't look at this as a short-term Band-Aid approach. I look at this as I hesitate to say permanent, because what's permanent? I look at this as a long-term solution to meet the space needs for one of the largest departments in the county. And I would hesitate to say that there is any long-term plan to move the Health and Human Services facility to Hudson. Originally when we started this process, we were looking at leasing space. That would have had a more temporary component to that decision. With the decision we're making today, I would look at this as a long-term commitment to the New Richmond facility, especially with the purchase price and the costs that are going to go into the facility to renovate it. Having said that, though, and I made this point a little bit earlier, that facility will be an asset to the county, and if the board would ever decide down the road to relocate Health and Human Services to Hudson or to anywhere else, the facility could be sold. And I think that we would recoup most of the cost of the purchase and most of the cost of the renovation, if that were ever to happen. But I'm looking at this more as a permanent solution. Yep.
Supervisor Malik.
Well, and even more cogent, it seems to me, is that the cost of rental is higher than the cost of purchase and renovation. So irrespective of how long we stay there, it makes no sense to rent.
Supervisor Hawksford.
Pat, I think I remember one of your slides, the $3 million budget number included operating costs. Is that true? And if so, what period are you including those costs?
I don't.
We
Go
did
ahead.
put in a factor for operating costs because we were comparing to 5 years of leasing.
Yep.
So we did put in an estimated cost for operating for 5 years.
So it is in there?
Yes.
Okay. So it's the leasehold improvements plus 5 years of operating costs?
Yes.
Okay.
Estimated.
Yeah, I understand. I just
How do you define, how are you defining operating costs?
Well, I would expect those to be your utilities, maintenance on the building, all those types of things, upkeep. Are those all included?
Yes.
Yes.
Any that I didn't catch?
No.
Don't beat around the bush.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Any other discussion? If not, I think we're prepared to vote. If the clerk is ready to accept your vote. This is a resolution approving the offer to purchase the former County Market Building in New Richmond, Wisconsin. Board members, proceed to vote. And the resolution is approved unanimously. Somewhat unique for this board. We don't do a lot of things unanimously, but I think this is the right decision, and I applaud your wisdom. Agenda item number 2 is a resolution designating official authorized to declare official intent under reimbursement of bond proceeds. This resolution comes to us from the Administration Committee, and Chair would entertain a motion. Motion by Supervisor Schachner, second by Supervisor Hawksford. Any discussion?
Does everyone have a pretty good, I tried to explain it in the background information paragraph, what we're trying to accomplish here. I don't know if there are any questions or if you understood that. Basically, this is for when a county or city, municipalities are working on capital projects that for authorized capital expenditures, you can utilize county resources that can be reimbursed at a later date with bond proceeds if there is a resolution by the board authorizing that to take place. And there's provisions that those need to be within 60 days, and there is a provision that that the board must delegate the responsibility to declare official intent to a county official. And the resolution calls for that to take place with the county administrator or finance director.
Any discussion? Supervisor Osmus.
Pat, just so I'm clear, this particular bond money that's going to be coming up in 2014 is going to be solely for 911 and whatever we're going to need for the HHS building?
It will be for the 911 infrastructure. It will also include, you know, the sale proceeds of 3.3 million are only going to go so far. And so when we package the bond the issuance in 2014, it's going to have to and it's gonna have to be timed right. And we're working with Casey on that, but it's gonna have to incorporate any infrastructure, the 911 build out, and any residual costs of any capital for the Health and Human Services build out and potentially for the deconstruction, because the proceeds of the sale will not cover all three projects, and so it will include all of that. But the board will approve, I mean, once we get to that point, the county board will have to approve the bond resolution, and it will be very specific at that point how the bond proceeds will be utilized. But this resolution is just in case that there needs to be an expenditure of dollars in advance of that bond resolution. Mm-hmm. And it's very common. It's not, this is not, I mean, this is very standard to have a resolution like this on file to allow for it.
Any other discussion? Are you ready? Supervisor Hawksford, your second. This is a resolution designating the official that is authorized to declare the official intent under reimbursement of bond proceeds. This comes to us on a motion by Supervisor Schachner, second by Supervisor Hawksford. Board members proceed to vote. And the resolution is approved unanimously. Chair Ring, the board chair observes that you've had a busy month, or several months, leading up to this. We have several resolutions that come from your committee. The next agenda item that is in front of us is an ordinance repealing and recreating Chapter 30, that is part of the parks, of the St. Croix County Code of Ordinances. This comes to us from the Community Development Committee, and Chair would entertain a motion.
I move adoption.
Motion by Supervisor Ring, second by Supervisor Brinkman. Discussion or any comments? Chair Ring.
Background: over 2 meetings, we did go through the ordinance, which was last done in 1991. We went through line by line, had some questions, made some changes. It's just basically updating information about the parks that exist. We have, like, Homestead Parklands is new since this was done. We talked about office or the hours, extra terrain vehicles, and just policies. So I think the staff did a really comprehensive job, and just it's a basic update. Any other comments from the committee?
Any discussion or questions, board members? I sense that you're ready to vote. Clerk, I inquire if you are ready.
Yes.
This is a resolution, actually it's an ordinance, repealing and recreating Chapter 30. This comes to us on a motion by Supervisor Ring and second by Supervisor Brinkman. Board members proceed to vote. And the resolution is adopted. The next agenda item is somewhat of a technical one. It creates some new language correcting a mistake that was made. I guess you could really call it, Chair Ring, a typo back, I believe, in '04 in a legal description. So this is an ordinance correcting a previous ordinance under Chapter 17 of zoning. This comes to us by the Community Development Committee, and Chair would entertain a motion.
I would assume adoption.
Motion by Supervisor Ring, second by Supervisor York. Is everyone comfortable and aware of what we're correcting? Is there any discussion on the correction of the legal description? Seeing no request for discussion, clerk is ready. This comes to us from the Community Development Committee on a motion by Supervisor Ring and a second by Supervisor York. Board members proceed to vote.
It's unanimous.
And the resolution is adopted unanimously. Our next agenda item is a resolution that also comes to us from the Community Development Committee. This is a resolution authorizing the Register of Deeds to provide free searches and copies of vital records to county agencies. That means internal. Our own office would be able to provide those copies, but when requested from another internal agency. I sat in on the community development meeting when this was discussed. I must admit I'm a little unclear why we need to do this, but you persuaded me it was necessary. So at this point, Chair would entertain a motion.
Also moved.
Motion by Supervisor Ring, second from Supervisor Kiesler. Any discussion or comment? Do you want to elaborate on?
I would comment. It just it's just removing some bureaucracy that doesn't seem to be necessary.
Bureaucracy?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And I think it's just making a process more lean. It's just busy. We're removing some busy work. Would be my take.
Right, it's we're just taking money from one pocket and putting it in the other.
And involving
And then giving
three
it back.
people in the process.
Sending a portion to the state.
Which they send back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, let's not do that.
That's the part that caught my attention. Why don't you just make sure that the board members understand that part? When we were charging the fee, then a portion of that we send off, and now we will not, right?
That is correct. It just simplifies it. So we get revenues from, transactions related to real estate, but when we have something related to an ordinance or something, maybe I'm not explaining this all that well, we just have to go get go have someone write a check, pay it to the Register of Deeds, and the Register of Deeds will send it out to Madison, and then when we get that portion back, it just seems ridiculous. Did I characterize that?
Yes, you
close?
did. Yes, you did. And our Register of Deeds, Beth Paps, is here this morning too as well. So Beth.
Is everyone clear on that, or do you want any additional information?
Are we pretty straight on this, Beth?
No disrespect, Beth, but we may not need you.
We're all good?
I think we're good. Okay. This is a resolution that comes to us from the Community Development Committee. I think you've heard the reason for it. This comes to us on a motion from Supervisor Ring, second from Supervisor Kiesler. Proceed to vote. And the resolution is approved unanimously. Agenda item number 6 is also from the Community Development Committee. This is a resolution authorizing St. Croix County Community Development Department to apply for 2013 land management planning and/or protection grants. Chair would entertain a motion.
I would so move.
Motion from Chair Ring, second by Supervisor Schachner. Discussion or comments?
Just a little background. Something that we've talked about doing in the committee is having this, what's called LIDAR elevation data. We can, and that's where we get topographic information to a much more granular level. And it's quite costly to get, but if we hook up with a couple other counties, we've reduced the cost to the county of about $130,000 to $180,000. Those are estimates that we've received. Through the mitigation funds, the basin team has some money that they are encouraged to put toward this project. And there's 2 funds from DNR that we can get support to, that we are asking for your support in applying for. There is still a balance of money that we need to find. We think some of that can come from the money that we receive from the Register of Deeds, the land transactions in the county. There's also an option to perhaps use some of the mitigation funds that will be coming to the county. I think one of the benefits of having this is just having that land and elevation information just available very widely. It would reduce costs of land surveys by public and private entities across in any land-related transactions. And what we're talking about here is just the protection of the resource. We can get better information and model information for land and water resources. So the committee thinks it's a great investment.
This is actually application to two separate, suggesting the application to two separate
Supervisor
grants.
Schachner, do you wish to be recognized?
Sorry, yes.
Supervisor Schachner?
This is also an application to two separate grants, and they included both grants in the same resolution.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Hawksford?
Can you help me understand how it's going to help reduce the cost of surveys?
Well, right now you would start with this, and maybe I can turn it over to Ellen to answer that more technically, but you'd start with elevation information, which they would have to go out on site and get. So do you want to explain?
Certainly. Basically, this data will be much more high resolution than what we have from our current aerial photography, and it actually would provide survey data. It can give you the kind of information where you could reconstruct a curb on a road, that level of detail. And what it does is it provides that kind of contouring data. We would provide that free of charge to all cities, village, townships, private entities, private surveyors, everybody in the county once we did this. We would make it available either online or by CD, whichever is the most quick and efficient. So our business people in the county would be able to utilize this data for any kind of development project they wanted to do and help them to estimate costs, to actually, there'd still probably be some refinement, especially when it comes to moving dirt and making changes, but it provides that base data for making those decisions, and it also provides that starting point which should cut down on actual survey costs for the refinement work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I believe we're ready to proceed to vote. This is a resolution that comes to us from the Community Development Committee on a motion from Supervisor Ring and a second from Supervisor Schachner. Board members, proceed to vote. And the resolution is adopted. And the final agenda item that comes to us from the Community Development Committee is a resolution approving the grant application for the Snowmobile Trail Aids Program. Chair would entertain a motion. Motion by Supervisor Ring, second by Supervisor Brinkman. Discussion. Supervisor Ring.
This is a grant application that we've done for many, many years. It requires authorization by the county board, and I think as you see in the application, we would get reimbursed for it at the rate of $250 per mile for all the miles that we have in the county of snowmobile trail. I'm looking for the amount. How many miles we have? 216 miles of state-funded snowmobile trails.
Supervisor Ring, Chair inquires, in the previous years when we've made application for this grant, and I know we've done this numerous times,
yes.
Has this grant ever been denied?
No.
Supervisor Malik.
My understanding is the money comes from registration fees collected for snowmobiles.
That's right.
If somebody wanted to really strike a blow against bureaucracy, they would pass a law that would allow a county board to pass such a resolution once and have it stand until revoked, instead of having to do it every year.
That was somewhat my point. Supervisor York?
He said, well, this seems redundant. Why are you doing it every year? Are they hoping somebody will forget and not apply and you'll get their money? Or, I mean, what are they doing? It kind of seems foolish, but I agree with Buck's statement. Do it once and be done with it.
Well, we follow the rules, and that currently is the rule. Any other discussion? You ready?
Yes.
This is a resolution authorizing application for the grant for the snowmobile trail. Comes to us on a motion from Supervisor Ring, second from Supervisor Brinkman. Board members proceed to vote. And it is approved unanimously. Board members, that takes us to one final agenda item. There are going to be a couple of presentations in the context of our discussion of this agenda item. This agenda item is already in front of us, as you will recall, because this was under discussion, was placed on the table, and then postponed to this meeting, so it is already in front of us. But because we are likely to spend some time on that item and sometime in the presentations leading up to it, I think it's appropriate for us to take a small break and get ready for that discussion. So we will be on recess until straight up 10 o'clock. We will stand informal until then. Let's reassemble and end our recess and proceed with our business this morning. We have one agenda item left. I would indicate to the members of the audience, if there are any persons here that wish to address the board, that opportunity is available, consistent with our bylaws. You will fill out a comment card, indicate your name and address. You will get the signature of your appropriate supervisor authorizing your presentation. I would say, with all due respect, and I say this carefully and strategically, if you really feel compelled to address the board, that opportunity is going to be available to you. Respectfully, I would hope that it would have new information of some kind. We spent a lengthy period of time at our June board meeting trying to accommodate everyone that wanted to speak. And if you do feel compelled to speak this morning, as I indicated, that opportunity is available to you under our bylaws. But unless it's new information and simply a reinforcement of something you may have said previously, you might want to consider not doing that. And I say that not in any attempt to cut off debate or dialogue or to be rude. It's just that I think we've got the information and we get the emotion. So if you've got new data, we're open to hear it. Otherwise, make up your own mind. But if you are going to speak, please fill out a comment card and have that ready. The way we're going to proceed this morning, board members and ladies and gentlemen, is to go ahead with the presentations. And please be informed that from a parliamentary standpoint, this action item is already in front of this board. This was placed on the floor in our June meeting. This comes to us on a motion by Supervisor Hood and a second by Supervisor Yorg. So that was the action item that brought it to our discussion. After some discussion and presentation, we did approve postponement of that agenda item to this day. So on a motion postponing it specifically to this meeting, on a motion by Supervisor Horn and a second by Supervisor Brinkman, the agenda item was postponed until our August meeting. This is our August meeting. It's back in front of us. So the action item in front of us is a resolution to authorize the county administrator to take all necessary steps to transition St. Croix Industries to a private provider. This then comes to us on that motion from Supervisor Hood and second by Supervisor York. The way we're going to proceed this morning is with several presentations, and they will be in this order. Terry Burrows will address the board with some comments from the perspective of Southwest Family Care Alliance. Fred Johnson, who is the Department Manager of the Health and Human Services area of the county, will speak to the board, and then Pat Thompson, County Administrator, will have some financial information. At the conclusion of those presentations, should there be anyone in the audience then that is compelled to address the board, that opportunity will be available. So make sure you fill out a comment card consistent with our bylaws, and then we'll proceed following any comments, if there are any, to discussion amongst the board members, and then ultimately to a decision on this resolution. Everyone clear? Okay, and with that, I will call forward Terry Burrows for presentation. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to come back and speak with you following the meeting that was held a couple of months ago. I just want to commend the board for the work that you have done over the last couple of months. I know there's been a lot of thought and a lot of meetings. We've had calls and actually meetings with some of the board members over the last, particularly the last couple of weeks, 3 weeks in preparation for today. I know you're facing a really challenging decision, and I wish you the very best as you proceed through that process. We're really committed to providing and assuring that a high-quality service is provided to the citizens of St. Croix County. That's our mission, that's our vision, and that's what we're all about. So whatever comes out of the vote today, we will work with St. Croix County to move through that process. There were a couple of outstanding issues that, as we've been working with Fred Johnson, he asked us to articulate today. We did include some of those, I believe, or he included them with Pat in your board mailout. So I would like to call attention to the quality document. One of the things that we were asked was, how do you assure quality of providers in Southwest Family Care Alliance? And I'm going to have Cheryl, our Chief Operating Officer, walk through that with you. And then I also believe there was a document sent out in terms of how would Southwest Family Care Alliance, we have now officially changed our name to Continuous, walk through potentially an RFP process. And so we can talk about that in just a minute. So if it's all right, I would like to turn it over to Cheryl to talk about provider quality, and then I will talk about the RFP process.
We talked about this. It was a question that was brought up at our family conversations when we were working together trying to answer questions. It was, how do you measure quality, or how do you know that a provider is offering quality services? And we monitor quality through a variety of ways. We get a lot of feedback through member advisory councils. There's nothing like listening to members and finding out what's working and what isn't. They're quite clear. Member satisfaction surveys is another way we receive feedback on services, all services that people receive. There's also a grievance and appeal process. If someone doesn't like a provider, they can file a grievance, or even if they don't like a care manager within our organization, there is a process to file that grievance and get consideration and make a change. We have someone dedicated to work with our members to work through that process, that are independent from caregivers or our providers, or even sheltered from us. They're like an advocate for the member. We also have what's called provider comment forms. Our care managers may be in the field and they are out visiting all of our providers, personally seeing members and seeing them in a workplace environment. And if they have a concern, they fill out one of these comment forms and turn it back into provider services with details, and then follow-up occurs. If it's something very urgent, that care manager will skip that comment form and make a call. I have this concern, you need to come out here. ways to assure that an RFP would bring inequality, and we talk about a kind provider, a compassionate provider. And when we do that, we include members and guardians on transition committees, and we would develop a selection team. We write the RFP, the request for proposal, so that includes hiring staff with the same qualities that you appreciate now. We also have general ways that we assure quality, and that's through our certification and credentialing processes that we use to make sure people can meet the scope of services they're supposed to provide. We do random provider satisfaction surveys. And specific for this area, we look at the percentage of work, of paid work. So we know that our members aren't just going to a workshop and sitting there. How many hours are they actually being paid? Those are a little more tangible. We look at the member pay rates and compare that to peers and across organizations. We look for job placements, and we look at a variety of community-based pre-vocational services being offered. We look at the array of activities provided that are not paid work, but are they related to enhancing job skills and productivity and employability? We also look at, is there any association with another accrediting agency to provide best practices input, such as there's a CARF accreditation. And we have a team of people that monitor critical incident reports. And we follow up on all of those, so if someone should be hurt at a work center, we have an immediate process that we follow up and do an investigation and take further action if needed. All of those come together, and we monitor. We have monthly quality meetings where we go through those incidents, provider comment forms, results from satisfaction surveys, member advisory council. So we bring the whole picture together, because you may hear one comment from one person, another here, but when you put it all together and display it in a spreadsheet, you kind of step back and go, oh, this is bigger than we thought. We better investigate. So there's all these avenues that we monitor quality to be sure that members are safe, they're receiving the services they are there to receive, and are having good outcomes. So if there's no questions, I'll turn back over to Terry.
One of the things that also happened between the board meetings, where there were several meetings with parents between St. Croix industry staff, human service staff, and Cheryl and Patty Kimmerling, our Director of Provider Services. I'm going to let Fred speak to those, and we certainly can chime in if there are other questions, so I didn't know that that was going to be within the purview of what we would report on today. The other piece that we were asked to talk about was, if the board decides to go through with a transition process, how would continuous work to procure another provider? And so we put together a timeline. I just want to point out to the board, it's not new to us to do a request for proposal or a competitive bid. I've been in human services myself, as I've said to you the last time I was here, almost 28 years. I've done and written RFPs in the past. I've been on scoring committees. So this isn't new to us. But what we did was put together kind of a generic process that we would go through if we were going to look for any provider. The only time that this was specific to what potentially may happen in St. Croix Industries is in the first box under number 1. We would see, I'm not going to go through this, I would entertain questions. You had a chance, I hope, to look at it before the board meeting. We would look at potentially a 6-month process. The first thing, if the board chooses to move through a transition process, is that we would prioritize putting together a transition committee, and even larger than that, really include family members who are self-identified to talk with us about what's critical before we even put the RFP together. We're committed to that process. It is part of our culture. This is a transparent process. And frankly, it's in our best interest to listen to people who are being served by the very services that they will receive down the road. What's important? So we would spend time doing that before we even put the criteria together. We would then ask that there be some sort of transition committee. I don't know who would be on that. I've seen some resolutions or amendments to the resolution today. We aren't worried about who's on that transition committee. That matters not to us as long as there's a process that people have input, again, a transparent process, so that people know exactly what's happened. Our only expectation is if there were family members on that, that they would then also keep other family members informed of what's happening in that process. We'd also have to figure out a communication plan to do that. But this is a 6-month transition plan. Again, if something happens in that process and something is taking a bit longer, that can be extended. We're not concerned about that. What I've heard very clearly in my conversations with Mr. Johnson is that St. Croix County is committed to working with us through this process should the transition occur, and that we would make sure services occurred in that transition that were continuing to be high quality. And that's what's really important in this, is as we move through, if a transition is decided, that we move through in an alignment to make that happen. This can't happen without all parties pulling in the same direction. That's really important to us. We will be open, honest, and transparent in that process, but we have to all work together. And I have felt nothing but support and the same kind of honesty and transparency from St. Croix, both from Pat and from Fred in this process. Because if we didn't have that, this would be a real challenge. So I'm not going to go through that. If you have questions, I certainly can entertain it. There was one other question that was raised when we met with a couple of county board supervisors, and that was, a question was raised, we've heard this word partnership. What does it mean to have a partnership between St. Croix County and Continuous or Southwest Family Care Alliance as we move through this process? And Fred and I had that conversation several months ago. We've talked a lot on the phone, and I said, he brought up the word partnership, and I'm like, what does that mean? I had the same struggle with that kind of language. What does partnership mean in this? And as we worked through that conversation, it really boiled right down to, how does the disposition, if this transition occurs, the disposition of assets that St. Croix County has get transitioned? Because without a partnership, and a partnership to means we're on playing fields that are equal and we're openly conversing around member needs, so member information, client information, if you will. How do the buses, I mean, it's nitty gritty kind of planning like that. How do you own the buses. If there's a transition, how do those assets end up in service with a new provider? What happens to the building? That is a partnership. And I understand that. Otherwise, when I think about this, this really is a collaboration. But ultimately, Continuous or Southwest Family Care Alliance is responsible for this decision with input from the committee. And then that transition committee can stay in place over time as the transition occurs, so that there's immediate feedback if there's bumps in the road. But ultimately, we have a responsibility with our contract with the department to make sure that people receive the services that they need, and we ultimately have to make that decision on who that provider would be. So I'm willing to entertain questions. I hope that that was helpful in answering that question for the board. Are there any questions for us?
Supervisor Osmond. Terry, I'd just like to thank you and the staff for meeting with Supervisor Brinkman and myself and Chris a week ago Friday. You folks went way out of your way, and the 2.5 hours that we spent went in a hurry, and you folks did a wonderful job answering all our questions, and I really appreciate all the help that you've done so far.
Appreciate the honest dialogue and conversation, and again, that's really who we are as an organization and want to answer those questions. We've also heard that the answers have been fairly consistent. That's really good. So that the answers that we're giving, whether it be Patty, and my apologies, Patty Kimmerling was unable to come today. She had an unexpected death in her family, so she is unable to be here.
Two kind of harsh reality
Supervisor
questions.
Jorgen.
Two harsh kind of reality questions. Number one, who governs you guys? Who is your gatekeeper? Who rates you guys as to your service levels, who says you're doing good, who says you're doing bad. Number two, if there were a change in leadership in Madison, would that change anything as to how you people operate? Or if we were to transition this thing, there was a change in leadership in Madison, could that kitty-wampus everything that we're doing here today? I mean, I'm asking it for me, but for everybody.
And I'm going to get to the second question for clarification in just a minute. Who's our oversight? Who oversees Continuous or Southwest Family Care Alliance? There's a couple of levels of oversight that I want to speak to. First, we have a 300-page contract with the Department of Health Services that is so prescriptive, it pretty much tells us everything we have to do. We have an oversight team that meets with us on a monthly basis, takes any kind of concerns. They are connected to the advocacy community, the ombuds for the program. They oversee our critical incidents, they oversee our quality, they oversee our certification, and we're in constant dialogue. And so we are a certified organization that must meet those certification requirements that are specified in a very lengthy contract. So that's the overarching regulatory body, and we have a lot of oversight. But from a governance perspective, who makes the decisions in our organization? We have a governing board. As I've shared with you, we are a public body, just as the county is here, a special purpose district. We were created by the 8 counties in our southern region, and so we have one county board supervisor from one of each of those 8 counties. And then we have 4 member representatives, whether they be in advocacy, a parent, a member themselves, a son, a daughter, a mother, a father. It's all of those combinations. And then 3 community members at large who bring special skills to the board. One of the questions is, that's only representation from the southern region. So where's the representation across the entire new service region, which includes these 5 counties? And on August 1st, we just expanded to the east. We're really, at this point, hemmed in by the long-term care district statute, which is Wisconsin statutes 46.2895, I know that well, that we are working with Secretary Rhodes and the legal counsel at the department to get that statutory language updated. We have, and our board has no authority under that current statutory language to remake themselves. And until that statute language is changed, we can't change our governing board. So that's where we're sitting. It's kind of out of our hands, and we've been working closely with Secretary Rhodes to get that changed. So does that answer your question in terms of the oversight piece? So the second question you asked is, if there's a change in Madison, are you talking at the gubernatorial level or the secretary?
Well, no, a change in leadership.
Okay. Every time anyone who works in government, anytime there's a change in administration, whether that be at the governor's level on down, the whole set of priorities changes. What I would say to that, though, is that family care has been a program actually since 2001. It's not just 5 years old, and I've worked in family care since 2001. And while priorities may change a bit within that program, the basic structure of the program itself has remained intact through, it started under Republican administration, it then was expanded under Democratic administration, and it's now under a Republican administration. Close scrutiny, which it should be. Any public program should have that kind of scrutiny, but they're not looking at closing the doors. We've talked with Secretary Rhodes about that, and that is not what we're thinking is going to happen. So we're always, every public program is at the whim, so to speak, of where the public administration is, but this isn't a new program, and something else would have to be replaced for the very vulnerable citizens that we serve. So I can't predict the future, but this has been a program that's been around for a long time. Mm-hmm.
Are you ready to move on? Supervisor Osmus.
Thank you. Terry, one of the questions that I've heard from parents lately, especially, and it's something that we addressed in Eau Claire. Right now, if a parent has a concern with what's going on, they can call a county supervisor on their behalf. And with the new transition, or if there is a transition and we go into a nonprofit or whatever, can you explain to some of the parents that are sitting behind us what that process is as far as who they can contact? And your first contact was start at the top.
Well, they certainly can call me, they can still call you, Dave, you're not off the hook, because you're still an elected official. And we get calls from county board supervisors who are concerned about their constituents. That doesn't change. It's not in a county board role overseeing a county agency any longer. But when we get calls from elected officials, we listen. We get calls from representatives. I just sat down with Kathy Bernier in Eau Claire 2 weeks ago to talk about a specific constituent issue. We do that. It's important to respond to senators, to representatives, to county board. And certainly there's mechanisms, multiple mechanisms within our organization. Whether you go internally to your care team and say, this isn't working. If there's and not if the transition occurs, there would be. We are committed to having a transition committee. If that's the vehicle where those come, so it's real specific, those will bubble. And we will address those. So there's multiple ways. Even though it's not a county-operated system, you still, as a county board supervisor, have a responsibility to listen to your constituents and advocate on their behalf. So it's still there, it's just in a different method. Is that helpful?
And if anyone wanted to file an appeal of one of our decisions, that appeal can occur at the local, what we call the local level, so it goes through our continuous channels. I almost said SFCA. I haven't transitioned yet. It can go through, there's like a mid-level that's facilitated by a company called Metastar. It's on behalf of the state, or it can go to an administrative law judge. So you're not just dependent on continuous. We like to resolve as much as we can at the local level, but if that doesn't work, you always have other avenues. So you're not just tied to us. And that oversight team that Terry talked about, Vince Morrow is on our oversight team. He lives outside of Eau Claire, and his office is in Eau Claire. You can feel free to call him, and he has a direct line. He knows how to find us. So there's multiple channels. You don't have to just talk to me and Terry.
Yes.
Supervisor Ring.
One thing I heard in talking to the family, one thing I heard repeatedly in talking to the family members is that they've just gone through a lot with your predecessor organization. Yes. And they are skittish. They're just so skittish that we can't go through this again for our loved ones. And I would like to support what Supervisor Osmus said. I've had conversations with you, and I know other people have too, and I think we are getting the same answers, and I think your commitment really comes through. Mm-hmm. When you talk about transition here, the transition in step 10, it seems like it ends with you know, the new provider organization, and we've talked a little bit about this, Terry. I think in their mind, that's just the beginning of the transition. It is not the end of the transition. Yeah. I heard you say that you're very willing to have this representative group go on beyond the date that keys might be transferred, and that
definitely.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I didn't say that, but if you see these little words right down here, which you can't see, but what it says is number 10. This could be extended. So clearly, I think in our conversation with you, I think that you were absolutely astute in that even though a new provider has been found, day one is just the beginning of a whole nother set of transitions. And I can't say there aren't going to be bumps, because there are going to be bumps. The issue is, how do you address those? Do you do that together? You hear about them immediately and you take action. And that's what we're committed to, and working with a provider, that those are really key issues. Bumps happen in any system. Absolutely. Even in a system that's well established. Stuff happens. But it's how you respond to that stuff, those issues, and we're committed to being on top of those. And if that means having a parent advisory committee or an oversight committee, we're real willing to do that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're ready to move on. Thank you very much. I call forward Fred Johnson. Fred is the Department Manager of the Health and Human Services area for St. Croix County. Fred?
Thank you, Board Chair. My presentation today will really hopefully provide some detail on what Health and Human Services Administration, along with Continuous, previously Southwest Family Care, has done since the board decided to postpone a decision until this meeting. After June 4th, we met on June 11th. Fred Horn, the Chair of Health and Human Services, joined us as well. We met with 2 parent representatives to help do planning. June 18th, I'm going to give a high-level overview because these notes were included, I believe, in the July 10th Committee of the Whole, as well as part of the Health and Human Services August 5th board meeting, so they're out there and available online. So we did some planning initially on June 11th with the families, 2 representatives. On June 18th, we met again. Most of these meetings with the parent stakeholder groups had about maybe 20 people on average, sometimes maybe a little less, sometimes a little more. We reviewed some of the fiscal background information. We met again on June 25th. We answered questions that parents developed after the June 18th meeting. It may be good to clarify how those meetings were conducted. So the first hour and a half from 5 to 6:30, there was staff available and present from both Southwest and Health and Human Services. At 6:30, we would leave. Parents would continue to meet till 8 o'clock or whenever they were completed. So when I indicate that on June 25th, we answered some questions that the parents had developed and the stakeholders had developed, it was after we had left. They submitted those questions beforehand, and we put them in a written response, went through those. On the 25th, some of the information that you heard this morning from Terry and Cheryl had been provided, initial presentation of Southwest Family Care to the parent stakeholder group. On July 1st, the Health and Human Services Board met, so we provided the Health and Human Service Board an update on what had happened since June 4th. At that meeting, a parent representative did speak and talked about questions were being answered and identified the concerns which I think Terry and Cheryl highlighted as well: safety, transportation, and continuity of care were some of the biggest concerns. The July 1st Health and Human Services Board minutes were just approved yesterday, and that information is in those minutes. July 2nd, one of the directives of the board was to also meet with staff. Tammy Funk, our Human Resource Director, and myself met on July 2nd and tried to address as many staff questions as we could. The long and short of that meeting is a lot of questions couldn't be answered until a definitive direction was set by the County Board of Supervisors. One of the things I noted yesterday at the Health and Human Services Committee meeting, or board meeting rather, was that there are staff currently that are looking for jobs and moving on. We had a retirement. We had a notice for a van driver. I think that person's last day is Friday of this week. We've had a staff that'll transition to our fiscal department, and we have another staff that's indicating that their intent is to retire near the end of the year. All of this, I believe, has to do with the question of whether St. Croix Industries is going to be a county-run operation. One of the things I noted in the Pioneer Press article is that the status quo was a quote by our county board chair, and I agree that status quo is likely not to continue. So staff that had concerns about whether we were in the business or what does the new future look like if we stay in the business have made decisions, and some have moved on. July 9th, we had an additional parent stakeholder meeting. From that meeting, we followed up on questions that the parents developed from the June 25th meeting. Those were provided, again, in written form in a handout. There was a continuation of the Southwest Family Care Alliance, continuous, to talk specifically about quality. You heard more about that today. Information was provided to the July 10th Committee of the Whole, and a presentation by myself and Clark Schroeder, the administrator of the St. Croix Industries program. July 12th, I did receive an email from the one of the parents that has been identified, as I would say, as a leader, indicating that the parent stakeholder meeting, the individuals at the July 9th meeting did not feel there was a need to meet with staff any longer. We did have a brief meeting yesterday after the Health and Human Services Board meeting, and the parent group, as I understand, has continued to meet. But my assumption is that they had enough information about the financials, maybe some information about safety, transportation, and continuity of care, that the questions were answered and they met, continued to meet. Early on in the process, a handout was provided at a parent stakeholder meeting that really identified potential future meeting dates and topics. 3 of the meetings that we had provided potential agenda items: July 16th, understand St. Croix Industries operational adjustments, possibilities, and impact. We did not do that presentation. Readdress stakeholder consideration lists, things that have not been addressed, potentially draft a stakeholder report that could be submitted today. That was going to potentially be addressed on July 23rd. That did not happen. And then July 30th was potential to finalize a stakeholder report and provide that today, and again, that did not happen. Health and Human Services met yesterday, August 5th, a regular meeting. We did provide a brief overview of some of the data that I'm presenting today. After that meeting, we did talk with 2 parent representatives, and I believe I took away a couple of things from that meeting. One is that the parent group or individuals have been out and have viewed other programs, and one of the quotes that was said yesterday is, we, meaning St. Croix Industries, are not necessarily a Cadillac program. There are good programs out there, other programs, and that the parent group feels truly prepared either way with a decision that may come forth, assuming it will come forth today via a vote. I highlighted yesterday in the July 1st Health and Human Services Board minutes, again, the concerns around safety, transportation, and continuity of care. Part of the issue was having Southwest here today is to, again, readdress those issues with the board on how they would address quality, how they would select a new vendor, how continuity of care may be done in partnership with the county. I think Terry highlighted the term partnership may have been confusing at first. Much more clarity in terms of what that partnership might look like, because ultimately, as the Health and Human Services Director, I would not be putting together the RFP. That would be a responsibility that Southwest Family Care Alliance Continuous would have to do. The Patty Kemmerling, who again could not be here today, did highlight at a parent meeting on June 18th commitments and responsibilities from, at the time, Southwest, now Continuous. I'm going to highlight all of those pieces, but I believe that document provides a little more detail or additional detail on what Terry Burrows said today in terms of their commitments. It's their responsibility to pick a provider, a good provider, a quality provider, but clearly willing and interested in participating in a collaborative process with the county. I have heard that from her and her staff from day one. Finally, there was a brief mention yesterday, and it is in your packet, and I think it's an article that is well written and summarizes the issues well, and that is the article that was written by Andy Rathburn in the Pioneer Press. And again, I highlighted status quo. Things are going to change, in my estimation, one way or the other. And that in many of the parent meetings, we've talked a lot about potentially matching the private sector on the expense side and not necessarily on the revenue side. And we've had lots of phone calls, and Clark Schroeder, our administrator, has seen what other companies are doing that are venturing into private sector business, like purchasing a Dairy Queen or a plastic injection mold company to provide more employment opportunities. So matching the private sector on the revenue side as a county entity could be more challenging. So with that, that's the information, Board Chair, that I provided yesterday, and would conclude my remarks this morning.
Are there any questions for Fred while he's here at the podium? Thank you, Fred.
You're welcome.
And finally, I'll ask County Administrator Pat Thompson to present some financial detail and analysis.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just stay here. In closing, if I'm sure some board members are wondering if we choose not to transition, and I've heard the question asked before, why can't the county just put this in their budget, or why can't we just add this to the overall tax levy? So just in closing, just to try to answer that question or those questions that might remain, the county still remains under state-imposed levy limits. And as you recall, last year when we approved our budget, we are right up against that levy limit. So if the board chooses not to transition, we would be looking at approximately $450,000 of additional operating levy, and in addition to that, eventual capital purchases to replace some of the vehicles that we are currently is part of our inventory that eventually will need to be replaced. I don't know if it'll be in 2014 or 2015, but eventually we have some vehicles. I mean, Clark has already pointed this out in last year's budget that eventually we're going to need to replace those. So bottom line, we're looking at approximately $500,000 that I will need to, working with the finance department, if we choose not to transition, to try to incorporate this into the 2014 budget. We can't do it by just expanding the levy. It would need to be incorporated within existing, already current expenditures. We can't dip into the general fund to fund an ongoing operation. If this was a one-time expense, I'd probably be recommending that we dip into reserves and fund it. But this is not a one-time expense. It's going to be, it's a reoccurring. It's an operational expense that will reoccur, annually. So we can't just transfer dollars to fund this. I wish we could. So in other words, how are we going to do it? Well, it's going to require the finance department, county administrator, to start looking at existing budgets. And the first line that, I would start looking at the larger budgets, certainly Health and Human Services. Are there programs within Health and Human Services that could be cut or reduced to help offset the additional cost? Are there law enforcement expenses? I've already asked the sheriff to begin preliminary work on what areas of his budget, including patrol officers, potentially vehicles, to reduce, to incorporate, to try to make up the difference of $500,000. I've asked the highway commissioner, what road projects, what bridge projects would have to be put on hold to help offset these additional costs. As I said, those are the big drivers of the budget: Health and Human Services, highway, law enforcement. We would probably look at all capital improvement projects, some of which we have talked about today, putting some of those on hold. General fund dollars just across the board, general fund departments, general services, administration. We would start looking at department by department where cuts could be made to make up the difference of approximately $500,000. Because one, we can't just add it to the levy, and we can't take it from reserves. So, it's not a insurmountable task, but it will require a lot of work by administration and ultimately by the board to make those decisions where those cuts would be made. I'm not recommending that But that is in response to questions that have been asked, why can't we just add this to our budget or to the levy? I want to express my appreciation to Terry and your staff for answering a lot of questions over the past 2 months. I think the staff has done a remarkable job in trying to meet with parents and guardians to try to address every concern that was raised. And I think, you know, sometimes we may not like the answer that we hear, but at least in my mind, the staff has done a remarkable job working with Southwest Family Care to try to address every single concern and answer every single question that was raised. And I think they have done that. Like I said, sometimes we don't agree with the answer, but at least the staff has done their homework. I will work with Southwest Family Care through the transition. I will be part of any advisory council, either through my office or through Health and Human Services, to ensure that if this process is approved by the board, that it's done right, and that the interests of St. Croix County, and along with working hopefully with a county board supervisor or two on the advisory council, that the transition is done. And I'm assured that I feel confident working with Terry that it'll be done right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Jochner.
What are our reserves? Where are they sitting at right now?
We're at the GFOA recommended reserve of 25%.
25 to 35 is in our fund balance, and that's what we have in general fund.
Which is what is recommended by the auditors and the GFOA. But like I said, you can't transfer dollars for ongoing expenditures. You can't. I mean, if this was a one-time allocation, certainly, but it's not.
Why can't we? What's stopping us?
Where does that end? Where does that end? I mean, you could continue to take $500,000 from your reserves indefinitely until you've depleted your reserves.
Well, let me rephrase it. I'm told that you said it's between 25 and 30. I'm looking for a hard number. What is that hard number?
I'd have to get that from.
Supervisor Malik.
While she's doing that, we do have the option of raising the wheel tax, do we not? We charge a $10 per wheel registration fee, but my understanding is that counties are not limited to $10, and that currently produces a revenue of about $700,000 a year, I think.
Correct. Is Mr. Ramberg still here? Statutorily, is that option, is that an option statutorily? It is, okay. Yes. Thank you, Tim.
Supervisor Yard.
If you've read the paper lately, Anoka County just repealed their wheel tax, and the funding is supposed to be used to fund road projects, all that. I'm not saying it has to be, but as counterpoint to your thing, other people feel it's an unfair tax, one that can be just adjusted at whim and fancies, and so those are under heavy scrutiny at this point, the wheel tax.
Tabitha, do you have the response to Supervisor Jochner?
Looking at our audit report, it's saying our general fund year-end fund balance is $20 million.
Supervisors, at this point, I think I will interrupt our discussion. We'll come back and pick it up, but we will inquire if there are any persons from the audience that do wish to avail themselves by using the comment card and addressing the board. One comment card has been given to me. By show of hands, are there others that wish to address the board in addition to Violet Peterson? 1, 2, 3. So I have a total of 4 speakers. Okay, I would ask you just then, for matter of efficiency, just to come around the way this way. And Violet, let's start with you. When you come forward, just introduce yourself, name and the community in which you live, hand your comment card to the clerk. Consistent with our bylaws, I will request that you limit your marks to 3 minutes. I will time that at the 3-minute mark. I will indicate by a tap of the gavel that 3 minutes has expired. And at that point, if you're still speaking, I would, with all due respect, ask you to conclude your remarks at that point. So, welcome.
Hi, I'm Velvet Peterson, and I'm from Holton. We have over 4,200 signatures supporting St. Croix Industries. We've had time to visit other workshops and can make many suggestions to improve St. Croix Industries. As parents and guardians, we must have a voice and a vote in the direction of St. Croix Industries, as well as our children's lives and the future disabled. We ask you to take consideration of our children and our families in making your decision. Thank you.
So I'm not from St. Croix, so I think I have to have your permission to do that.
Oh my goodness, you're putting me on the spot. I will do that.
I put briefly in that I would be brief in my comments, so I thought that would be attractive.
Introduce yourself and the community of your residence.
Sure. My name is Jody Hanna, and I work for Disability Rights Wisconsin, which is a statewide organization. I'm the director of our Rice Lake office and also an attorney, and we serve Northwest Wisconsin from that office, including St. Croix County. And I just wanted you to know that we are a resource and we're willing to partner and continuous. Now I'm just going to start calling you Continuous. Continuous is definitely, we work with them. One of the programs we run that people should know about is the Ombudsman program. So any family that has any concerns should be welcome to contact us. I brought materials about the program. We have a toll-free number. We have ombudsmen who do cover this area, and if individuals have concerns about the transition plan that's happening, we're available. The other thing I wanted to say is just to encourage you to not just passively do an RFP process, but to really make sure that the infrastructure is there for providers that are be willing to take on these roles, and that you also think about community-based supported employment as much as possible. That's the law, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act requires the county to do that, the state to do that, and also Continuous to do that. Think about the most integrated setting for services for people. And I also think you might want to get DPI, Department of Public Instruction, involved for kids who are transitioning into the adult system and going to receive services as adults. There's resources there. And vocational rehabilitation. I serve on the Wisconsin Rehabilitation Council, which oversees VR, and VR can help people with disabilities. I mean, that's their role, is to help them find jobs. So there's supports and services and dollars there that are available. So I just wanted you all to know about that and to know about our agency. And again, I have materials. I'll leave some for the board, but also for anyone in the audience, just to know that we're available, and we'll be supportive during whatever transition you come up with as far as your decision. So, thank you.
My name is Karen Cordum. I'm formerly from Hudson. I've written to many of you on the board, I think all of you. I have a brother that lives in New Richmond and is mentally disabled. I am a sister and guardian, and I'm being his voice. My main concern is that in the past, we saw what happened with Community Health Partners, and that is why I am so concerned for him. The last few years have been very, very critical for him, and this is why I'm concerned. It's more of an emotional thing, but we're here from Florida, and I just want to express that. So I just hope that you will take that into consideration. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Chris Ainsworth. I live in River Falls, and our son works at St. Croix Industries. I don't. Should I not be here then?
No, go ahead.
Thank you. One of the things that I wanted to bring to the attention is the St. Croix County Health and Human Services Board, page 3 from September 24th, 2010. And the paragraph reads, additional capital outlay expenses of St. Croix Industries were eliminated to address increased health insurance cost. The St. Croix Industries 2009 fund balance of approximately $500,000 is part of the $1.2 million used to apply to the overall county budget deficit. Our children have given. We just want to have it back. Thank you.
Chair inquires if there are any more comment cards that are going to float forward. We have one more.
Oh, no, that's the one.
Oh, that is the one. Excuse me. At this point, we're concluded with the comments. Thank you all for your presentation. And board members, we now have an agenda item in front of us. This is the resolution that has been presented. A resolution to authorize the county administrator to take all necessary steps to transition St. Croix Industries to a private provider. This comes to us on a motion from Supervisor Hood, second by Supervisor York. Discussion. Supervisor Brinkman.
Mr. Chairman, I'm used to not having to have a microphone when I talk. Mr. Chairman, I would like to propose an amendment to this resolution, if possible.
Indicate your amendment, Supervisor Brinkman.
I would like to start with lines, I believe, 39 through 41. I would like to remove them and replace them with the following.
It appears to me, Supervisor Brinkman, and you have provided me a copy of this language, that your amendment is a substitution of the language that is there and replacement with what you're about to read?
Yes, but also what I did not give you is something that was handed to me by another supervisor that should also be in there.
Proceed.
It says, whereas Wisconsin Statute 51.4374A provides in part, the County Board of Supervisors has the primary governmental responsibility for the well-being of the developmentally disabled citizens residing within its county. From there, I would then take what I gave you earlier. Do you want me to read that out loud too?
Yes, the board needs to understand what it is that you're proposing, Supervisor.
Therefore, be it resolved by the St. Croix County Board of Supervisors that a committee consisting of 3 St. Croix Industries SCI parent representatives as determined by the St. Croix Industries Parents Group, the county administrator, the chair of HHS, the St. Croix Industries director, and a member at large to be appointed by the county administrator shall, with full voting authority and voice, and with the full financial support of the county, work in collaboration with Southwest Family Care Alliance, now known as Continuous, to develop, review, promote, and accept into an RFP to structure and facilitate the transition of St. Croix Industries to a private provider or entity.
Thank you, Supervisor. Chair inquires, Supervisor, to this point, the language that you indicated that was not included in your written proposed amendment is statutorily obvious, and I fail to see how it adds anything specifically to the resolution. Can you be a little bit more specific as to how that is an addition?
I think it further, I think it's the right thing to put in there, Mr. Chairman.
Are you suggesting then that that be included in the therefore section, or it is previously an indicated whereas?
As a whereas immediately before the therefore.
It would seem to me then, Supervisor, that you were really proposing two amendments. Would you agree?
No. No, I see what you're saying. For the sake of the amendment then, I'm going to ask that we remove the whereas as I presented it.
So you are presenting one amendment, and it is the therefore, the
Yes.
replacement of all of the language that is the therefore?
Yes.
Chair will accept that amendment. On an amendment, a motion to amend by Supervisor Brinkman, all of the language in line 39, 40, and 41 from your draft resolution would be stricken under the proposed amendment and replaced with the language that he read. Is there a second to the amendment? Second from Supervisor Osnes.
I did not get it out here.
Here it is.
If it's, but exactly, is this what he read?
This is what he read, yes. Discussion on the amendment. Supervisor Malik.
I fell behind trying to make notes of it. Could I hear it again?
Supervisor Brinkman, do you have it in written form that you can hand to all of the supervisors?
I have enough for all the supervisors here.
Please distribute them.
There you go here. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you guys all have them? Okay, can I get a couple more down here?
Do all board members have a copy of the proposed amendment? Discussion. This is an amendment to strike the language in the resolution and insert in its entirety the proposed language. Supervisor Brinkman.
I speak today not only as a supervisor on this county board, but I'm also going to speak as the uncle to a 15-year-old niece with Down syndrome and a 14-year-old nephew who is highly autistic. I talk of my brother and my sister and their respective spouses, and while they don't live in this county, I know what these types of programs mean to these families. In receiving phone calls from caregivers and talking with people from the parents group, they understand that, at least it appears to me that they understand that if we vote today to keep this a county funded program, the county administrator is going to gut it down. That is part of his job, is to bring to us a balanced budget each year. They also understand that Terry and the crew from Continuous, these people really do want to do the right thing. And the biggest thing I'm hearing from parents is they call me, and they do, not only people from my district, but other districts. They're concerned at the county administrator having the full say on this. Now, we've heard the county administrator talk today that there will be a group put together. We've heard it from Continuous. I think this is the right thing to do. Let's get it in there. Let's take one let's make this much easier for the people that this is going to affect, the caregivers. Let's take this off their plate. Let's let them know that as we move forward to transition this, that one, we are going to transition to private care. Absolutely, it's going to happen. But that they're going to have a seat at the table and that they're going to have a say in how we do it. It is because of that reason I ask you all here today to support this amendment so that we can do the right thing for the people it affects the most. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion. Supervisor Hawksford.
I agree with and actually like the concept. My only concern is, and I guess we need to massage the wording a little bit, in my opinion, too, as Supervisor Brinkman indicated, that there is no doubt we are transitioning it. As I read this, I don't get that sense. We're taking out the wording that says we are transitioning it, and the new wording says we'll have a committee to evaluate. I'd like to see some amendment to the amendment made that indicates clearly we are transitioning it.
Same thing we do.
Yeah.
Very last line.
Supervisor Malik, comment for the board? Everybody should probably hear that, sir.
I was just checking to see if we had the same version, and it appears we do. And I read the last words of this amendment to say, promote and accept an RFP to structure and facilitate the transition of St. Croix Industries to a private provider or entity, which is not the same words, but it sure is, to my mind, accomplishes almost the same thing as, or would have the same end product as lines 40 and 41 that have been removed by the amendment. The question I wanted to clarify was the expression, the chair of HHS. Now, I assume that would be the chair of the Health and Human Services Board, who is currently the incumbent of which is Fred Horn, Supervisor Horn. Is that
yes.
The intention? Yeah. Then the phrase in about the middle of it, shall with full voting authority and voice and with the full financial support of the county. I suspect that's the part that's probably giving Mr. Gillen the most excitement, as it does me, because I would probably think like lawyers, and we're wondering, voting in what? Voting in the meetings of the committee? That's obvious and to be assumed, but does it imply full voting authority and voice somewhere else? For instance, in the meetings of the Health and Human Services Board? Well, it doesn't really say that, so I would assume, subject to clarification, that it doesn't mean that. And full financial support of the county probably means per diem for meetings and travel expenses for necessary travel. If that's what it means, I can agree with that. If it means somehow to override the budgets of the county, that would be extraordinary, but I assume that's not what's meant. So there are some questions that I would hope the proponent or someone else could clarify before we vote.
Thank you, Supervisor Malik. I do have circled here, shall with full voting. I'm wondering if this board, by virtue of this resolution, has the authority to impose a requirement on a third party that we have some kind of voting authority. So I'm going to call on the Corporation Council to address that, because I would question if we are able to make that statement.
Well, I think you're correct, Darrell, or Supervisor. We wouldn't be able to do that, but I think it's important to find out from Southwest, I mean, what how they look at this language and what their thoughts are. And I think Supervisor Ring had provided an amendment this morning to our office we looked at. It's very similar, but I think it's maybe a little tighter. It probably still has some working, or needs some amendments perhaps, but I think it's a better wording than that particular language. But I think it does the same thing. But again, I think it's really up to Southwest how they feel with this, if this is going to work or not, this agreement.
Thank you. This is Terry, and I guess the question those were the lines that I also underlined is, shall with full voting, it sounds like we're in a waterfall, shall with full voting authority and voice. I don't know what that means either, and that was really something I was questioning. Does that then mean that the county makes the decision, for Southwest Family? Yep. Do you want me to go to a different mic? There we go. The question is, does the county have the ability to compel SFCA? I'm not an attorney, so I'm kind of out of my element in this, but my understanding is we could collaborate on that, but I don't know that the county can actually compel. This is one of those areas that you may not like the answer, but I'm being honest, is that SFCA is a separate and distinct unit of government, and I don't know that council, I would need to talk to our attorney about that, but I'm not sure how one unit of government can impose a decision on another unit of government that are separate and distinct. So I don't have a problem with the language. I saw Supervisor Ring's amendment as well. I don't have an issue with in the resolution that there be a body. We're committed to that. The question that I have is, what does it mean to be full voting authority? And if that means that that committee makes the decision for us, I would have an issue with that, and I'm just being honest. But input and working with, and what I have found in 28 years of doing this is that people do come to the same conclusion in the end by working together, and that you trust the process. So I'm not afraid of the committee. That language I'm concerned about, and I'm just being honest.
Supervisor Horn.
Thank you, Board Chair. Hearing from the others, I would support this amendment by offering another amendment strictly to, I think it's going to clear it up. So right after the basic member at large be appointed by the county administrator shall, and I would strike everything until work. So in a sense, it has the intent of creating this committee to represent, help the families, set up this committee to transition this to the private parties. I think it has all the workings. It sets up the committee as Supervisor Brinkman had spoke so eloquently about taking this one last piece of, they're worried about the transition. So if they know that they have a seat at the table, that some people that they have been working with have a seat at the table to walk them through this transition process, I think it eases some of their concerns. So I would offer that as an amendment to the amendment.
Supervisor Horn, your amendment is to strike, by my count, 17 words beginning with shall.
No, I would keep shall and strike with full voting authority and voice and with the full financial support of the county. So
so 15 words. So it would read shall, strike all the words beginning with work.
Shall work in collaboration with Southwest Family Care Alliance.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, because striking the 17 seemed a little awkward to me.
Yep.
Is there a second to the amendment? Second from Supervisor Malik. We now have in front of us for discussion on a motion by Supervisor Horn, second by Supervisor Malik, an amendment to the amendment, and the amendment is to strike the 15 words in the text provided by Supervisor Brinkman beginning with the word with and ending with the word county. Discussion. Supervisor Atino.
I would just like to ask, and I think the intent is very good. Does that satisfy Supervisor Brinkman's?
Response, Supervisor Brinkman.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Brinkman is okay with that. It was that Robert's Rules of Order training you gave us at the last meeting that I'm using.
Sidebar. Supervisor Ring.
I've got a question of clarification on the intent. When the points I raised before is transition, how are you defining transition? I mean, is there a time period? Does it go just through when the keys are handed over? And then if we transition out...
Supervisor Ring, with all due respect, I don't think, valid though your discussion is, I don't think it's germane to the tight little amendment that's in front of us. I'd like to sort of keep us on track. I'll come back to you.
Great.
We're discussing the amendment to strike 15 words. Any additional conversation or discussion on the amendment to strike? Terry?
We're fine with it as well.
I'm glad everybody's fine. Okay, let's proceed to vote as soon as the clerk is ready. Our sidebar was that we're getting so many things in here, we're going to have an orderly process. So this is going to be a motion from Supervisor Horn and a second by Supervisor Malik to strike the 15 words. Is Supervisor Malik's in there? Board members, proceed to vote, and this is on the narrow issue only of striking the 15 words from the language presented by Supervisor Brinkman. Proceed to vote. And it is approved 15-1. So the amendment to the amendment is approved. Now we are back to the amendment to the resolution. The amendment to the resolution is the language presented by Supervisor Brinkman after the 15 words have been stricken. Discussion on the amendment. Supervisor Oxford.
Just a question, does this still require us to remove the current therefore on lines 39 through 41?
Affirmative. That is the amendment. The amendment in front of us is substitution language. It would strike in its, I've already lost, I have to log back.
Right, I got it.
It would strike lines 39, 40, and 41 and substitute the new amended language in its place. I think now we come back to your point, Supervisor Ring. I think that is germane now to the amendment that's in front of us. Proceed.
Okay. So it is a question of clarification then on the intent. I mean, is there a time frame, or might this benefit from having a time frame attached to it? Then the other question I have is the St. Croix Industries Director. If we transition out, will we still have that position, or at the St. Croix Industries Director while that position is still there? But if it transition out, we may not have that position. So that would be a question.
Administrator Thompson, I turn to you.
I stepped out, stepped back in. Possibly a representative of St. Croix Industries, rather than identifying it by position. I think the entity itself is going to be it's going to be around for a little bit, so maybe the wording should just say a representative of St. Croix Industries.
It's maybe not that, maybe that's so concerned. But I am concerned about the transition period. Do we say what is that? Do we put a sunset on it? Is it 2 years? I want it absolutely, and I think the parents want it to go beyond the point at which you hand over the keys. I have a second question or concern. We take out the full financial support, which I think is too vague and shouldn't be in there, but I would, I think maybe that we should consider language that if the county does provide any kind of capital assistance, that come back to the board. If there's a recommendation, for example, by this board that says to be successful, we need to do something, some capital assets or cash needs to be, if there's any kind of subsidy involved, that would come back to the county board. That's my thought.
In all candor, Supervisor, I don't see how we could do that without it being a county board decision. So I think it's implied, but I will turn to the administrator and corp counsel on that point.
The use of any capital or further expenditures of county resources would be authorized by the County Board of Supervisors. So I agree with the chairman that it's implied.
That any support beyond the council that we're talking about would come back. So they may have a recommendation. It's not in the hands of the advisory team. It's in it would come back.
If it requires the expenditure of county dollars, yes.
Or transfer of assets.
Or transfer of assets.
Okay. All right.
Correct.
They would not have the authority to do that, was the point I was
right.
making, Supervisor Ray. Any additional discussion on the amendment? Board members, are you ready to vote? Supervisor Malik.
I think there's still an ambiguity, and so it would be good to have the intent on the oral record at least. What does it mean to accept an RFP? The RFP, of course, is short for request for proposals. In the process of reaching a contract, an entity like us first drafts a request for proposals, a document that goes out to the world at large and invites people to submit proposals. Accepting an RFP can mean two different things. It can mean that the committee has been working on a request for proposals and they have come to a final decision on what the request will say. That's quite different from after it's been out and prospective contractors have submitted their bids or proposals saying, this is the winning proposal out of the three we've got. I think what the drafters probably intended here was that this council would have that authority to determine who is the winning bidder. But I think that needs to be clarified if that's the intent, because I don't think it says that exactly now.
Supervisor Brinkman, I inquire of you, since you are the drafter of the language, what was your intent?
It is my intent that, Mr. Chairman, that any proposals that are sent out, first of all, go through this committee and then are brought back to this committee for final approval. Absolutely. I think it's important that the people this is going to affect the most have a seat at the table and get to work with. That's my intent. I apologize, I'm not an amendment writer. I don't know all the... I sell used cars for a living, okay? But, stop. By the way, no. But that's my intent. My intent is to get the people that this is going to affect the most to the table and let them have a say in, one, what they're looking for, and two, accepting what is being offered to them. Plain and simple.
Terry, I inquire from you, and you previously said you're fine with the language, so I assuming that that intent is practically and procedurally possible. for us to do?
Yeah, the part that I would just want to make sure that, and I do trust a process that happens like this, I've been a part of them, but I would want to make sure again that we aren't compelled by the number of people on this committee to go with an organization that we don't feel we can contract with. I mean, it's that kind of thing, we don't know. I'm not concerned that we're going to have highly competent and qualified providers through an RFP process. We believe there will be plenty of organizations to bid. But if those providers, as we go through the process, don't meet our specifications, whether that be quality or price, that we then are compelled by the vote of this committee to go enter into a contract as an organization and put our dollars on the line. What we would need to do at that point to put people's concerns, I would guess, at rest is that we would then need to go back to the drawing board. But I'm concerned that there's some sense of we would be compelled, and that's the part that, as we at the organization at risk financially can't be compelled to enter into a contract with an organization we can't afford.
Absolutely understand, and so I inquire specifically. Do you feel compelled by the language that we are considering?
That's much better. I heard, I don't know if it was you, Supervisor Ring said, is it an advisory committee or is it a voting committee? And I think that that's a real key issue. If it's an advisory committee, again, I trust that process and I've been through that. The issue is, can we be compelled as an organization at risk to enter into a contract? And I think the process is going to work just fine. I've not been in business this long to not experience that. I think it's going to be fine. But that's the pin for me where it gets kind of stuck is what if the bid comes in at $11 an hour and that's the lowest bid? Then what do we do? Then I think we need to go back to the drawing board and involve this committee to say, we need to go back and talk with the providers who submitted proposals. But to say this committee has the authority to compel Southwest Family Care Alliance or Continuous to enter into a contract, I do have an issue with. So if that's the intent of the language, I'm concerned about that. If we can say this is an advisory committee that we will highly respect the involvement of and have a transparent and collaborative process, I'm fine with that. But I just want to make sure that the minutes reflect what that definition is.
Supervisor Osnos, you were seeking recognition a bit ago.
No, I was okay. My question was the same as yours.
You're okay? Supervisor Schachner.
I think if we are going to go forward with a transition, this type of language is good language because it brings people to the table that currently aren't represented. However, this language has some issues with it, as we can see, and we're asking people who are not legal counsel how they feel about this legal thing. And my question is, when would I would like to put forward that we send this. I don't think I can do this right now because it's just an amendment and you can't send the resolution back. So if we were to move on this amendment and then send it back to the committee so that this issue here can be cleaned up, I would do that after this amendment is addressed.
Supervisor Hoxford.
I'd like to propose that we change accept to evaluate.
You are presenting an amendment.
Okay.
That was the question.
Yes, I am.
Proceed.
I am suggesting we amend the verbiage and replace accept with evaluates, or evaluate RFPs, plural.
The word accept in the next to last line.
Yep.
Do you have that language? Okay. And I'm sorry, Supervisor Hoxford, your amendment is to strike the word accept and replace it with what? Evaluate?
Yep.
Word for word.
Yep. And then you probably put RFPs, so we get more than one.
Is there a second to the proposed amendment? You're seconding the amendment? Okay, on a motion from Supervisor Hoxford, second by Supervisor Yorg, we have an amendment to the amendment, which is an amendment to strike one word and replace with a word. Discussion on the proposed amendment. Supervisor Malik.
I think it would be clearer and more effective to label this an advisory committee on the second line, right where it says a committee, say an advisory committee. And then everything else after that has to do with working in collaboration with Southwest Family Care to develop, review, promote, and accept. But it's all in an advice context, and I think that's exactly what Supervisor Schachner was talking about, and Supervisor Brinkman and Supervisor Ring.
So Supervisor Malik, Chair inquires, you are urging defeat of the proposed amendment, and then you will present another amendment.
I tried to get your attention earlier, but you did the right thing and got the one who raised his hand first.
I try and do the right thing. Thank you for confirming that. In front of us right now is an amendment on a motion by Supervisor Hawksford and a second from Supervisor York to amend the amendment by striking the word accept and replacing with the word evaluate. Discussion on that proposed amendment. Supervisor Ring.
If we go with that, I just think that it would be to evaluate the proposals, because, and then it would be to develop, or I would encourage you to say, you're developing an RFP, one, and you're evaluating the proposals that come in. If we go that, I would make that suggestion. I do, however, agree with Supervisor Malik that just changing it to advisory committee is also a good suggestion.
Are you, Chair inquires, are you simply making some comments, or are you proposing an action item?
I think the action items,
The action item is currently
I'm
for
just
the
making
evaluation.
some comments.
Thank you very much. We are back to the proposed amendment from Supervisor Hawksford. This is a motion from Supervisor Hawksford, second by Supervisor York, to amend the amendment by striking the word accept and replacing with the word evaluate. Board members, are you ready to proceed on that narrow amendment? And are you ready? Proceed to vote only on the amendment to strike the word and replace with the word evaluate. The motion to amend the amendment fails. We now have in front of us a resolution with a proposed amendment. Discussion. Supervisor Malik.
I move to amend by changing the second line, changing the word a to an, and introducing the word advisory.
Chair inquires, where are you inserting advisory?
Right after the word and, which is what resulted by putting an N on the word of.
County Board of Supervisors, that.
And advisory committee.
It seems to read funny. Therefore, be it resolved by the Board of Supervisors that. And advice. I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. It's and, not and. And advisory. Yes. Motion by Supervisor Malik. Is there a second to the proposed amendment? Second by Supervisor Horn. Discussion. Supervisor Osnes.
With that amendment, then the word accept, would that be okay with Southwest? And we could leave the word accept in there. Okay.
Well, it's in there now. That amendment was defeated, so that is the way it reads. Terry.
Just to be clear, again, we really intend for us to work together. What advisory though does is says it is an advisory committee and doesn't have that final compelling to enter into a contract. So the advisory committee can accept, but ultimately SFCA, the organization at risk with the Department of Health Services, has the final authority. we are going to listen. If we don't listen after, as we've sat here in these public meetings on tape and don't listen to the constituents here, we've lost a lot of our credibility. So we're committed to that, but the advisory takes care of that issue from my perspective. And Cheryl would agree, so that works for us.
Any additional discussion on the amendment to strike the word "a" and replace with "an advisory"? Supervisor Oxford.
Yes, I think that in changing it to an advisory committee, I think that fits well with the verbiage that we have now. But my concern is that we don't then we haven't included a mandate to actually transition it. All we've done is we've created an advisory council to go through that process. So I don't think we can go with just forming an advisory council or committee. I think we need something like the previous verbiage that was in there, where the county administrator is authorized to take the necessary actions. In addition to that, we're going to form the advisory committee that will help guide the transition process.
He's part of that group, though.
He is, but it's just an advisory council, so that advisory council could say, well, we decided we're not going to do it. Where I think it's the intent of the board today to say, we are going to do it, but we want an advisory committee to help make sure we do it right and everyone's represented.
Read the last line of the resolution.
Supervisor Oxford,
But it's an advisory council. It doesn't require that.
Supervisor Oxford, I think that you raise a valid point that the board may want to address. It seems to me, though it is an additional point,
okay,
with respect to an advisory committee, my suggestion to you, sir, would be that we dispose of one way or the other the amendment to the amendment that's in front of us, and then come to your point and see if you want to add any specific language, because the point you're raising is not directly germane to advisory committee. Are you agreeable with that?
I am.
Let's return to discussion then on the amendment that's in front of us, which is amendment from Supervisor Malik and a second from Supervisor Horn to amend the proposed amendment. I hope you're keeping track of where we're at. I think I'm there. By striking the word "a" and replacing with "an advisory." So it would then read, therefore be it resolved by the St. Croix County Board of Supervisors that an advisory committee, and then we proceed. Supervisor Malik, do I capture your proposed amendment correctly?
Yes.
Any additional discussion on that amendment and that amendment only? You ready? Supervisors, proceed to vote on that narrow amendment, which is striking the word "a" and replacing with "an advisory."
Rick, your vote. Passed 14 times.
And the amendment to the amendment is adopted. Supervisor Oxford, I return to you to inquire if you are proposing any specific additional amendment language addressing your point.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding or don't clearly understand the amendment as it's worded now. If I do, somebody help me understand. I think I stated my concern is, my concern is that we're not clear. Are we clearly saying that we are going to transition it? Period.
Mr. Chairman, what I think might help is that, and it's in the title of the resolution, And I think that this would also clarify all the amendment and the discussion, so that the title of the resolution would read, Resolution to transition St. Croix Industries to a private provider. So you would strike, authorize the county administrator to take all necessary steps. So the title of the resolution would be Resolution to transition St. Croix Industries to a private provider. So I think it would accomplish what you're saying along with the intent of the board.
May I offer that amendment to change the title as just stated, Mr. Chairman?
You may, Supervisor. Is there a second? Second from Hawksford. Discussion on the amendment to the, wait a minute. I just need to think this through. This is not an amendment to the amendment. This would be an amendment to the resolution. We need to hold that and deal with the amendment that's in front of us. Then ultimately, we are likely to wind up with an amended resolution, at which point we could consider the title. At this point, that would be out of order, and I need to hold that.
Just hold it in abeyance.
Are you guys just doing this to me, or? We'll come back to that. Yeah. At this point, we have in front of us an amended amendment for consideration. And I believe that it would read as follows. And you can look at your copy, but I think I have this correctly. The amendment that has been amended would read, therefore be it resolved by the St. Croix County Board of Supervisors that an advisory committee consisting of 3 St. Croix Industries parent representatives as determined by the St. Croix Industries Parents Group, the county administrator, the chair of HHS, the St. Croix Industries director, and a member at large to be appointed by the county administrator shall work in collaboration with Southwest Family Care Alliance, now known as Continuous, to develop, review, promote, and accept an RFP to structure and facilitate the transition of St. Croix Industries to a private provider or entity. Does anyone disagree with my reading? I think, according to my notes, that's where we're at. That's what's in front of us for consideration. This amendment, as amended, would strike the language that begins at line 39 in the resolution that's in front of you and replace it with this language, inclusive. Any additional discussion on the proposed amendment? Supervisor Brinkman.
80 several minutes ago, Mr. Chairman, when I made this amendment or proposed this amendment, my feelings still are the same. I want to be able to get the people to the table that are going to be the most affected by this, and I want to help make this transition as smooth and seamless as possible. That has not changed since all this debate began.
Any additional discussion? Well, that's his used car salesman background coming out with the transmission, I suspect. Board members, I believe that by body language, it looks like you're ready to vote on the amendment. We are not voting on the resolution. We're voting on the amendment to replace all of the language at 39, 40, and 41 with the language I previously read. Clerk, are you prepared?
It was a motion by Brinkman.
This is a motion by Brinkman, second by Osnes. Board members, proceed to vote on the amendment.
Passes unanimous.
And the amendment is adopted. Thank you, Supervisor Brinkman. We now have in front of us an amended resolution. And at this point, Supervisor Malik, I will return to you. It would be in order if you still want to propose an amendment to change the title.
I move to strike words from the title so that all that remains is resolution to authorize, resolution to transition St. Croix Industries to a private provider.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Ring. Discussion. On the amendment? Supervisor Schachner.
I question how changing the title holds any authority, because the title isn't, you could change it with, it just, very rarely does the title actually mean a lot of the stuff. Like Patriot Act covers a whole bunch of stuff underneath it. So I don't know how the title of a resolution actually gives any, grants any direction with the resolution.
Supervisor Malik, you are the proposer of the amendment. I return to you.
Well, the title is a guide to understanding the contents of any document. It's generally, to avoid technicality, let's just say that it's part of the context. And if one is concerned to interpret the text of a resolution, the title of it may shed some light on it. We want to have this title be consistent with the amendment we've just put down at the end. And if there's a question about what does that substitute language that we put in as the therefore, whether or not it truly means we're going to have a transition, making the title consistent with, yes, there will be a transition, makes sense.
Additional discussion on the amendment to the title. Seeing none, I believe you're ready to vote. Are you ready? This is on a motion by Supervisor Malik, second by Supervisor Ring. And you are ready? Board members, proceed to vote on the amendment to change the title. That's all you're voting on. And the amendment is adopted. Board members, if you are keeping track of where we're at, we now have in front of us an amended, retitled resolution. This comes to us on an original motion by Supervisor Hood and a second by Supervisor York. Discussion on the retitled amended resolution is now in order. Supervisor Osnes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's more of a tidy up thing. And my question probably is for Don. Instead of Southwest Family Care Alliance or anywhere that's printed in here, since you folks are now continuous, should we be replacing Southwest with continuance in this resolution?
Is that your new name now? Is it continuous now? Yeah, it probably makes sense to do that.
And I would think that editorially we can just do that. That
Right.
would not, because that was a transition they made.
Yes.
Point well made, Supervisor Osnes. Thank you.
And it's got a unique spelling, by the way.
Additional discussion on the amendment retitled resolution. Supervisor Schachner.
I would like to move to send this back to committee to get this all clarified and address make sure that it fits legally with what you can do.
Is there a second? Supervisor Malik, you were seconding?
No, I wanted to debate it, but if it
Yeah.
has no second.
There may not be a second. Is there a second to the motion to refer to committee? Chair would observe that the motion fails for lack of a second. We have in front of us an action item, and it is a resolution to, as it now reads, resolution to transition St. Croix Industries to a private provider. And it has been amended with the language that replaces everything from 39 through 41. Additional discussion? Seeing none, I believe we're ready to vote. Are you ready?
No, I just
Okay.
tell you something.
The sidebar is that we have a software limitation. This is presented to us on a motion originally at our June meeting by Supervisor Hood. Supervisor Hood is not physically present today. That simply means that she's going to have to override the system to assign this to someone else so that we can proceed to vote using our software, but it will in fact reflect in our minutes that this is a motion by Hood, second by York, and it comes from our June meeting. Is everyone clear with what we're doing?
You pretend he's here.
I can't do it.
You can assign it to somebody else.
I can, as long as they
make the motion.
Okay, board members, after a long amount of discussion, all of which I think has been meritorious and good, we are at a decision point. In front of us now is a retitled resolution. This is a resolution to transition St. Croix Industries to a private provider. It has been amended, and you are voting on the amended resolution, which includes the language that was presented by Supervisor Brinkman. We are now ready to vote on that inclusive legislative item. Is everyone clear what we're voting on? Supervisors, proceed.
Okay, I'm going to give the motion to Agnes as recorded here, but then Fred has to put in your second. So go ahead. And although the record will say.
Right.
All right.
Board members, proceed to vote. And the resolution is adopted on a vote of 13-3. Thank you, board members and audience, for your patience, your civility, and the accomplishment of this resolution. Clerk, do you have any report of correspondence, or do you have any rezoning requests?
I have nothing to report.
I am not aware of any announcements that need to be made.